Hi and welcome back to the Bolt and Hammer YouTube channel. Today will be the last of my series of videos on factions available to play the Combat Patrol game style in 40k. Today's video is going to go over Xenos armies. So I'm going to cover armies like the Eldari, Drukhari, Tyranids, Gene Stealer cults, Necrons, Leagues of Votann, Tau Empire, and the Orcs. With all of that said, let's get stuck in. The Eldari are space elves. They're an ancient race that ruled the galaxy for millions of years. Shortly before the creation of the Imperium, their society succumbed to decadence and pleasure-seeking so vile that they gave birth to Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess. Slaanesh killed billions of Eldari and destroyed their civilization. Some Eldari managed to escape destruction and are now struggling to survive. The Eldar and Drukhari are the major sub-factions with combat patrols, so I'll discuss those in a minute, but first I wanted to mention some of the other sub-factions. Harlequins are the guardians of the Eldari's history, knowledge, and culture. With this role, they're welcome across all Eldari sub-factions, and you can see their units join any Eldari army. Harlequins used to be a separate army, so they have lots of units available, but no combat patrols, unfortunately. Corsairs are Eldari who turn to a life of piracy. They serve as hired guns in other Eldari armies. Lastly, we have the Ynnari. They are something of an end times cult that wants to give birth to a new god called Ennead to fight Slaanesh. They've only got a few models of their own and instead can incorporate units from other sub-factions. Some Eldari managed to escape their civilization's destruction by fleeing in continent-sized spaceships called craft worlds and are now traveling the stars in these massive ships. To distinguish themselves from their ruined ancestors, they took to calling themselves Eldar instead of an Eldari. They are led by psychers known as farseers, who can see the strands of fate of possible futures. Their combat patrol allows them to change the results of some dice rolls and has a lot of bonuses to movement and defense. They're a relatively fast, semi-elite army with good shooting, but their melee and defense are not very good. The Drukhari are the other major sub-faction of Eldari who managed to survive the fall by living in a part of space known as the Webway, which sits in between real space and the warp. They are the direct descendants of the most sadistic parts of Eldari society, and today they continue to live lives focused on torture, piracy, and cruelty. In fact, they need to perform cruelty on other living things in order to sustain themselves. In the combat patrol, their rules reflect this by giving them power boosts when they damage or destroy enemy units. Like the Eldar, they're very fast, semi-elite army. Their melee is better than the Eldar, but their shooting is still okay. And like the Eldar, their defense is also not very good. The Tyranids are an enemy to all life in our galaxy. They appeared recently after crossing the void between galaxies and are now attacking from several directions. They are a hive mind collective organism that consumes all biomass on the planets they conquer and are thus somewhat universally feared. Have you ever played StarCraft? These guys are what the Zerg were based on. In the combat patrol, they get bonuses for being close to each other, easier for the hive mind to control, and can terrify enemy units into giving up objectives. They are also able to bring back some units after being killed, exemplifying the unending swarm of attackers in a Tyranid army. They are very fast and have some decent melee units, but their shooting is a bit weak, and they're not very tough, being a horde-style army. To me, the Gene Stealer cults are one of the more bizarre factions in 40k. They are humans who have been infected by vanguard organisms of the Tyranids, whom they worship as gods. You can see that some of them have begun to morph to look more like the Tyranids even. They work as saboteurs and rebels to weaken a given planet just before the Tyranids arrive to attack. And if they're successful and the planet falls to the Tyranids, they are eaten along with everything else. If they fail and the Tyranids are defeated, they will likely be killed by the Imperium. A real heads I win, tails you lose kind of situation. That said, I think their aesthetic is pretty cool. A bit more like Mad Max, though we'll see a better example of that in a few minutes. In the combat patrol, they can bring some of their units back after being killed, like the Tyranids can. Their units are able to buff each other, giving bonuses to hit and granting extra movement. They're fairly quick already, so this extra movement can be really helpful to stay in cover while still doing damage. The ranged attacks are good, but they really only have one good melee unit. They're maybe halfway between Elite and Horde with 17 models in the box, but are definitely on the squishier side of defense. The Leagues of Votann are space dwarfs. They're the descendants of humans who left Terra in the early years of space exploration tens of thousands of years ago. They are a cloned species, calling themselves kin, and live with robots called Ironkin, which have equal rights and standing within their society. They have much more advanced technology than the Imperium, having avoided some of the worst of the Dark Ages that the Imperium went through over the last few thousand years. In the combat patrol game, they have a rule that makes it easier for them to kill an enemy which has killed one of their units. Essentially, they can hold a grudge. They've also got some bonuses to attack and defense and can reposition units on the board for free. Their units are relatively slow, but their combat patrol does come with some vehicles which are quite fast. Defense is good, but not great, and they have some solid specialist units for ranged and melee. I'd say that they lie at the midpoint between Horde and Elite with 19 models in the box. The Necrons are the undead Egyptian mummies of the 40k universe, except that they aren't quite undead. Millions of years ago, they were tricked into undergoing a process of biotransference that transferred their consciousnesses to these robot bodies you see here on the left and in the middle, in order to gain immortality by their gods, the Catan, so that the Catan could devour their souls. In retaliation, the Necrons used their advanced technology to obliterate their gods into thousands of smaller shards and enslaved them to serve the Necrons. The cost was high to Necron society, and with the Eldari race in ascendance at the time, the Necrons chose to enter hibernation in tomb worlds until the Eldari threat faded. That time has arrived, and now the Necrons are waking up with the intent of retaking the galaxy. In the combat patrol game, their core ability is to be able to reanimate and heal dead or damaged Necrons every turn. They also have some bonuses to melee, range attacks, defense, and objective control. They're at the midpoint of Horde versus Elite with 18 models in the box. They have a couple very high-powered ranged attacks, but overall, they are a more melee-focused army. Most of their units are quick, at the cost of being weaker on defense. The Tau Empire is made up of a collection of species working together for the greater good. But before you start thinking that these are the good guys in 40k, remember that there are no good guys in 40k. They're still quite happy to shoot you if you get in their way. The bulk of the Empire is made up of the Tau species, who are known for their Gundam-style battlesuits and excellent shooting. The Kroot, and to a lesser extent Vespids, are other species that make up their armies. The Tau are led by Ethereals, which are still Tau, but ones who appeared mysteriously several thousand years ago and quickly gained control over all of Tau society. Under their leadership, the Tau advanced quickly to be the starfaring species they are today. In the combat patrol game, the box is made up of entirely Tau without any other species. Their core rule lets one unit provide spotting guidance for another in order to improve their ranged attacks. They also have bonuses to shooting and a bit on defense. Their combat patrol is a bit more on the horde side at 22 models in the box. They have excellent shooting and terrible melee, and while they are very quick, they are also weak on defense. Orcs! They are the last army that we will be speaking about today. They are very well known to be the only faction that is having fun in the 40k universe. Some orcs love to fight with scrap metal armor and weapons. Some love to fight with squigs, which are like attack pigs, being useful for both war and food. Some love to fight in big Mad Max style vehicles. But what they all have in common is that they love to fight, and they care little about winning or losing, making them some of the most intractable opponents for many of the other armies. Their society is made up of two related races, the aforementioned orcs, which are big and tough, and the diminutive Gretchen, or Grot, which function as cunning helpers. Like the World Eaters of the Chaos Space Marines, they are the source of a lot of 40k memes, most notably screaming during battle. Their combat patrol focuses on fighting with squigs. You may have noticed that in my orc combat patrol, I don't have any squigs, and that's because I have an older version that's no longer produced. In the current squig-focused combat patrol, their core rule significantly boosts melee attacks and overall defense for a whole turn. They also receive additional bonuses to melee. They're a horde army with 25 models in the box. Their melee is excellent. Their shooting is wildly inaccurate, but it can hurt if they do manage to land a hit. They have some fast units, but are not particularly tough on defense. And that's it for today. If you couldn't tell, while I like Space Marines, I love a lot of these Xenos armies. Please let me know which is your favorite in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe to the Bolt & Hammer YouTube channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.